Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. During the Buddha's time, there was a monk named Cakkhupala. He had determined not to lie down during the entire 3 months of Rin's retreat in order to intensify his practice. During that period, he contracted some eye disease, and the doctor told him that he have to lie down in order to put medicine in his eyes. But he refused to do so in order not to break his determination. So eventually the disease got worse and he lost his eyesight, but meanwhile he also attained adulthood. After that, he decided to come to Jetavana monastery to pay respect to the Buddha after attaining adulthood. So he came to Jetavana monastery and he was pacing up and down outside his kuti doing walking meditation. That time he stepped over some insects. And some visiting monks who were visiting that monastery, they saw some dead insects outside the Thera's kuti. And they thought Cakkhupala Thera killed those insects. So this matter they reported to Lord Buddha. And Lord Buddha asked them, did they actually saw themselves, Cakkhupala Thera, killing those insects? And they said, no, they haven't seen. Then the Buddha said, just as you haven't seen yourself, Cakkhupala Thera killing those insects, in the same way Cakkhupala also didn't saw those insects when walking. So that's why the Cakkhupala Thera is innocent. And in addition to that, Cakkhupala Thera is an arahant. So he cannot have an intention to kill. He cannot have an intention of killing. So Cakkhupala Thera is innocent. After that, the monks asked Lord Buddha why Cakkhupala Thera became blind in this life. Then Lord Buddha told his life story, his past life story, Cakkhupala Thera's past life story. In one of his previous existence, Cakkhupala Thera was an eye physician, and he deliberately made one woman go blind. That woman had a bad eyesight, and she had promised that she will become his slave if her eyesight gets better. She and her children, including everyone, will become his slave if her eyesight gets better. So the physician started the treatment, and her eyesight was getting better. Then she was afraid now she have to become his slave with her children. So out of fear, she lied to the physician that her eyesight is getting worse. But in fact, they were actually perfect by then. So the physician also knew that she was lying. So out of anger, the physician gave her another medicine that made her completely blind. Because of this unwholesome action, he lost his eyesight in many coming existences. And even in his last existence as a Cakkhupala Thera, he lost his eyesight because of this unwholesome deed. And this is when the Buddha uttered this stanza: Mano pubbangama dhamma mano settha mano maya manasace paduttena bhasati va karoti va tato nang dukkham anveti cakkang va vahato padang. Mano pubbangama dhamma. Mind is the forerunner of all knowable states. Mano settha mano maya. Mind is their chief, and they are all mind-made. Manasace paduttena bhasati va karoti va. If one speaks or acts out of unwholesome, corrupt mind, tato nang dukkham anveti cakkang va vahato padang. Just suffering follows as a wheel follows the hoof of the ox. The story and the Pali verse that I just chanted are from the wonderful book called Dhammapada from the Khuddaka Nikāya of Sutta piṭaka. Dhamma here means the truth, or we can call it the law of nature, and the pada refers to the verses. So Dhammapada, the verses of truth, or the verses of law of nature. These are not the laws established by the Buddha. These are the natural laws which were already existing, and the Buddha discovered them and pointed out to us. Those who follow the laws of happiness become happy, and those who follow the laws of suffering fall into suffering. It's a simple law. Dhammapada consists of 423 verses, and from the beginning of very first two verses, it challenges us to reflect on our life by contrasting the wholesome action and unwholesome action that we do in our life every day. Another important truth revealed in Buddha's teaching is that these wholesome and unwholesome actions are not something promulgated by a divinity, or not something that's based off of social stigma, or something that's made by a country, like country's law. But this is something based on the state of mind when we are doing those actions that determines whether it's wholesome or unwholesome. This is based on the state of mind while performing those actions. If bodily, verbal, or mental actions are done with the unwholesome mind, then no matter what the country's law says, no matter what the social rule says, no matter what the scripture says, those actions are unquestionably an unwholesome action, and they will definitely bring a suffering in future life. Similarly, something if a bodily, verbal, and mental actions are done with the wholesome mind, then no matter what the scripture says, or what the social law says, or the country's law says, it becomes an wholesome action, and it will bring happiness in the future. For example, let's say the country's law may praise killing of the criminals, or the social rule may encourage discriminating certain group of its population. But since these actions are always done with unwholesome mind, so according to Buddha's teaching, these are always unwholesome, and they will always bring a suffering in future. And one can actually experience this unwholesomeness if their mind is wise enough and sharp enough. Dhammapada is rich with similes that brings clarity and touches the heart of the listener. Sometimes the verses of Dhammapada causes the listener to see the cause and effect clearly. This is called sandasana in Pali. Sometimes it causes the listener to accept and create desire to practice. This is called samapadana. Sometimes it fills the listener with enthusiasm and gives encouragement. This is called samuttejana. Sometimes it fills the listener's mind with delight and joy. This is called sampahangsana in Pali. The first stanza I just uttered reveals the very important concept in Buddha's teaching. When most of the other religions and other traditions, other spiritual traditions, focus on some divine being who created this universe and the living beings, the Buddha's teaching reveals the very underlying truth of the nature. It says, we ourselves, our mind itself, is the creator. There's no. It advocates that it's not the God that gives us a reward and punishment, but it's our own mind, the wholesome and unwholesome nature of our own mind that gives us a reward and a punishment. Let's analyze this stanza in a little bit more detail. Mano pubbangama dhamma mano settha manomaya. Here the mano refers to the mind. To be specific, refers to a vijnana khanda. Sometimes it is also translated as consciousness. So mind or consciousness. In Pali, it's referring specifically to vijnana khanda. And the Dhamma, here the word Dhamma refers to other three khandas, three mental khandas, mental aggregates, Vedana, Sanya, and Sankhara. Some of you might know that in Buddha's teaching, the mentality is divided into four groups, four khandas. They are Vijnana, Sanya, Sankhara, and Vedana. These are four khandas. So here, Mano is referring to the Vijnana khanda, and Dhamma is referring to other rest of the three khandas. And if we bring the fifth one from the materiality, Rupa khanda, then all of these four together is referred as Panchakhanda, the five aggregates. The Panchakhanda, the word Panchakhanda will come again and again many times in Buddha's teaching. So it's quite useful to know these four names. The details regarding these five khandas are out of the scope of our Dhamma talk. So for these details, you can listen to some of the other Dhamma talks in Abhidhamma in IIT YouTube channel. You can refer to Ariyañāṇa Bhante's Abhidhamma. You can refer to Ariyañāṇa Bhante's Abhidhamma Dhamma series in this channel. He will be covering the basics of Abhidhamma. Also, some of you may be surprised that the word Dhamma here is referring to 3 aggregates. Meanwhile, previously the word Dhamma in Dhammapada, in the word Dhamma referred to a law of nature or the truth. This is because the word Dhamma have a very broad meaning. Some of the meaning it can cover are, sometimes it can refer as a phenomenon, sometimes it can refer to a law of nature, sometimes it can refer to teachings of the Buddha, sometimes it can even refer to ultimate realities or causes of ultimate realities or even general qualities or like a non-self nature. So, but in this context, in this verse, in this context, the word Dhamma is referring to 3 aggregates. Okay, back to our 4 mentalities. Among these 4 mentalities, the word Mano is referring to the Vijnana Khanda, and the word Dhamma is referring to the other 3 mental khandas, 3 aggregates: Sanya, perception; Vedana, feeling; and Sankhara. Sankhara is collectively referring to 49 cetasikas except Vedana and Sanya. And the verse says, Mano Pubbangama Dhamma. The mind is foremost. Mind precedes all these other 3 Dhammas. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean that mind, the Mano, the Vijnana Khanda arises before other 3 Dhammas. It means it is a foremost, it is a forerunner. Because of the mind, the other 3 Dhammas get chance to arise. It is one main reason for arising of the other Dhammas, the other 3 mentalities. And the next verse is Mano Settha Manomaya. Mano Settha. The Vijnana is the leader that leads the Dhammas, leads the other 3 mentalities. It is predominant among the 4 mentalities, the 4 aggregates of mentalities. Mano, Vijnana is the leader. It leads them. And also Manomaya. The Dhammas, other 3 mentalities are mind-made. Because of mind they come into existence. They are mind-made. So it's called Manomaya. Now let's move to the next verse. Manasache paduttena bhasati va karoti va tato nang dukkha manveti chakkang va vahato padam. Manasapse paduttena bhasati va karoti va. If one speaks or acts with a corrupt mind, Manasache paduttena bhasati va karoti va. This sentence reveals the yet another very important truth or the law of nature, referred in Pali as Kamma and its Vippaka. We can say, in other words, it's a cause and effect. We reap what we sow. If the Kamma is done with the unwholesome mind, then it will produce suffering. The Vippaka, the result, will produce suffering. And if the Kamma is done with wholesome mind, it produces happiness. The result will be happiness. In addition to this, there's a certain concept called Kamma Sarikkhata in Pali. So what it means is the similarity between the action done, Kamma, and the Vippaka, the result. For example, if someone kills a being by beheading, then the most likely as a result of that unwholesome deed, he will also be killed by his head being cut off. Similarly, if someone saves a life, then as a Vippaka, as a result, he also might be saved. He also gets saved as a result. His life also gets saved as a result. So in essence, the Vippaka will be quite similar to the Kamma that is done. It's called Kamma Sarikkhata. There is a list given on what are the unwholesome Kammas according to Buddha's teaching. The list is as follows. The unwholesome 10 akusala kammapada, 10 unwholesome deeds. Panatipata, killing beings. Adinna dana, stealing. Kame sumichachara, adultery. Musavada, false speech. Pisunavacha, divisive speech. Fadusavacha, harsh speech. Sampapalapa, frivolous speech. Abhijja, covetousness. Vyapada, strong hatred. And Mitchaditi, wrong view. When any of these akusala kammas are done by the being who have a latent defilement in the mind stream, latent defilement of lobha, dosa and moha in the mind stream, then these actions, they leave a certain force in the mind stream, which is called kamma sati. This kamma sati follows the mind stream of the being, just like how wheel follows the hoof of the ox. They follow the mind stream of the being until a favorable condition is met for it to give a result. This is like having a potent seed, and whenever the favorable condition of sun, water and soil arises, then this seed will give a result. This seed will sprout into a plant. In the same way, this kamma sati of akusala deed, it follows the mind stream, and whenever it finds a favorable condition, it gives a result of suffering But there is no need to be all depressed and sad. There is also good news. In the second verse, it says, Mano pubbangama dhamma mano setta manomaya manasa che pasannena bhasati va karoti va tato nang sukham anveti chaya va anapayini. So mind is the forerunner of all good states. Mind is chief, and they are all mind-made. If one speaks or acts with a pure and wholesome mind, the happiness follows as one's own shadow that never leaves. As mentioned in this second verse, our wholesome actions also leave kamma sati, the force, that follows us from life after life. And whenever it finds a favorable condition, it also gives a result of happiness. There are a list of kusala kammas mentioned in Buddha's teaching, which are as follows. 10 kusala kamma patha. Panati pata vedamani, abstaining from taking life. Adinna dana vedamani, abstaining from taking what is not given. Kame sumichyachara vedamani, abstaining from adultery. Musavada vedamani, abstaining from false speech. Pisuna vacha vedamani, abstaining from divisive speech. Fadusa vacha vedamani, abstaining from harsh speech. Sampapalapa vedamani, abstaining from frivolous speech. Anavijja, non-covetousness. Abhyapada, non-hatred. And sammaditthi, right view. There is also a list of 10 punya kiryavatu, 10 meritorious deeds we can find in Buddha's teaching, which are as follows. Dana, generosity. Patidana, sharing merits. Pattanumodana, rejoicing in others' merits. Sila, virtue. Apachayana, respect. Vayavacha, service. Bhavana, meditation. Dhammasavana, listening to Dhamma talks. Dhammadesana, giving Dhamma talks. And Ditthiju Kamma, getting one's view correct. Just like I said before, when all of these wholesome deeds, when a being does it, then it also leaves a certain force called kamma sati. And this also follows us like a shadow follows a being. It follows us, and whenever there is a suitable condition, it also gives a fruit, it also gives a result of happiness. That's why the verse says, Manasa che pasannena bhasati va karoti va tato nang sukham anveti chaya va anapayini. That's how the happiness follows like a shadow that follows us, that never leaves us. Teachings in Dhammapada are very fundamental teachings of the Buddha, common to many Buddhist traditions. Buddha's teaching in particularly, those are collected under a name Theravada teachings. They are indifferent to many of the dogmas and metaphysical issues that we find in different other religious practices. You will know this yourself when we go through these Dhammapada verses in this series of Dhamma talk on Dhammapada. In this series, I will guide you in this meditative and self-transforming journey of Dhammapada, with all its enlightening verses, beautiful similes, and the interesting background stories from 2,500 years ago. Also, when listening to these Dhamma talks or any Dhamma talk, please keep in mind the Buddha's teaching from Kalama Sutta, that you should not believe just because the tradition says so or the teacher is saying so. You contemplate this in your life. You try to, you experience this. You see, you judge yourself. You find whether it's actually true or not, and then only believe these teachings. Also, whenever possible, I will point out some practical tools that we can apply from our Dhamma talk to enrich our spiritual practice. So from this today's Dhamma talk, the practical tools are to contemplate on these two verses, to see, to observe in our daily experience whether it's actually true or not, that the actions done with wholesome mind is bringing a wholesome result, bringing happiness, and the action done with unwholesome mind is bringing suffering. Do you find any contradictions in this statement, or can you confirm this statement? Observe your mind and observe the external world to see whether these two verses are true or not. And for the old-time practitioners who have already spent some time practicing Buddha's teaching, I would like to invite you. I would like to give you a task of memorizing these two verses by the next Dhamma talk, which will be next month on this Dhammapada series. I will end this Dhamma talk with a very nice background story from the second verse. There was a very miserly Brahmin called Adinapubhaka. He had a son named Matthakundali. The Brahmin was so miserly that he never gave any donation, he never did any charity. He even tried to save money in the expenses, in the family expenses. And once when his son was sick, the doctor was not consulted until the end, just to save the money. The son Matthakundali passed the point of recovery, and he was definitely going to die. So the miserly Brahmin, Adinapubhaka, he took the son outside of his house so that the visiting people won't see his possessions inside the house. That's how miserly he was. So the boy was left outside the house. That morning, after waking up, Buddha surveyed the world with his all-knowing knowledge, Sabbanyuta Jnana, to check which beings are ready for his Dhamma talk, for his Dhamma. And in that knowledge, he saw Matthakundali, the boy, sick boy, lying outside his house. On the way to alms around in Savatthi, he stood in front of the Adinapubhaka's house, in the door, and sent a rays towards the boy. The sick boy was facing the other side. So he sent a rays, and the boy looked at the Lord Buddha. He was very weak, so he couldn't pay respect physically. So all he did was he mentally paid a respect to the Buddha. And that moment, with the mind full of faith towards the Buddha, he passed away. After passing away, he was reborn as a deity in Tavatimsa heaven. From his celestial abode, the deity Matthakundali saw his father mourning his death in front of the cemetery. Then he appeared in front of his father, and he informed his father of his rebirth in Tavatimsa heaven. He also encouraged his father to invite Lord Buddha for alms in his house. So the Adinapubhaka, the miserly Brahmin who never gave a charity, he invited Lord Buddha in his house for alms. That time, the question arose in the assembly that can one be reborn in a heaven just by paying respect mentally, without doing any charity or keeping any precepts? Can it happen just by mentally paying respect to someone? At that time, when this question arose, the Lord Buddha invited the Deva Matthakundali in the assembly, and Matthakundali appeared in his all glory as a Deva, and then he informed the assembly how he was reborn as a deity in Tavatimsa just by paying respect mentally to the Lord Buddha. And this is when the Buddha uttered the second stanza of the Dhammapada. Mano pubbangama dhamma mano settha mano maya manasace pasannena bhasati va karoti va tato nang sukkha manveti chaya va anapahini. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.